A heavy metal axe slams hard into solid ice, anchored to that single point of survival. A lone climber in heavy blue gear fights his way up a sheer vertical freeze. The true, terrifying scale of his battle is laid bare against the K2 East face. A massive, deadly monolith that has claimed countless lives, reducing the man to a mere speck on the wall, yet framed by thick snow goggles. His eyes lock onto the summit with fierce determination, unfazed as the howling wind seems to ask a single, chilling question. Where are you going? Miles away from those frozen peaks. Delicate cherry blossoms drift through a clear spring sky, marking the quiet start of a new school year. But the serenity ends at the imposing front gates of a massive, rigid high school. A heavy stone sign proudly declares the institution's name, Kanagawa Prefectural Yokosuke North High School, as the towering architecture looms overhead. The silence is broken by an adult's voice probing into a student's past extracurricular activities. Inside, footsteps echo rhythmically down the polished hall as a teacher leads his new arrival forward. Receiving absolute silence in return, the balding, bespectacled teacher glances back, waiting for an answer he realizes isn't coming. Continuing down the empty, sterile corridor, the teacher tries to fill the void by lecturing his new student about the heavy pressure of upcoming college exams. Trailing right behind him, the dark-haired boy remains an absolute brick wall of silence. Frustration finally starts to mount, prompting the teacher to turn back and demand if the kid has given any thought to his future at all. Viewed from the courtyard below, the teacher's exasperated voice echoes out the windows, pleading to know if the boy is even listening. Their destination is Class 3-1, hanging quietly above the sliding door. But inside, total chaos reigns as a monstrous hand clamps down viciously onto a student's shoulder, accompanied by a booming voice screaming out a special attack name. A hulking bully towers over a terrified classmate, brutally digging his thick fingers into the boy's shoulder just to show off his insane grip strength. Just before things get worse, the door slides open and the homeroom teacher steps in, instantly calling for order. Completely unfazed by authority, the giant bully just smirks at the metal gripper in his palm, mockingly telling his classmate to save that crazy strength for climbing mountains. Ignoring the circus, the teacher steps up to the podium and calmly motions toward the hallway, inviting the new student to enter the fray. A single, quiet footstep marks the arrival of the new student. The room goes instantly silent as Mori Bontaro stands rigid before the chalkboard, his expression cold and unmoving as he is introduced to the class. The class gets a dead-on look at the newcomer, his messy black hair framing hollow, deadened eyes that betray absolutely no emotion. Anxious and sweating, the teacher leans in, desperately urging the boy to break his silence and introduce himself. Whispers ripple across the nearby desks as two girls lean in, instantly captivated by his dark, brooding aura. From the classroom, one of the girls loses her patience and demands that he hurry up with the introduction. Mori doesn't even flinch. He stands motionless before the sea of expectant faces and internally dismisses the entire situation, concluding he has absolutely nothing to say. Mori keeps his gaze low, completely brushing off the entire room. The girls immediately recoil, their curiosity instantly replaced by confusion at his cold, antisocial vibe. Trying to keep his composure, the teacher nervously instructs Mori to have a seat. He points Mori toward an empty desk positioned right in front of the classroom's resident giant. Mori slides into his chair as Miyamoto, the bully behind him, throws out a cocky, challenging greeting. Ignoring him completely, Mori rests his head on his arms and instantly checks out, falling back to sleep. Miyamoto's eyes narrow as he realizes he's being given the silent treatment. Irritated, the bully turns his focus to his metal grip trainer, squeezing it hard as his frustration begins to boil over. Whispers ripple through the sterile classroom as observant students crane their necks, eagerly watching the brewing confrontation. The gossip quickly identifies the looming threat. The aggressive bully, Miyamoto, is moving in for the kill, and the situation has suddenly turned grim for the oblivious transfer student. A hulking, violently veined hand clamps down onto the fabric of the new boy's dark uniform. Miyamoto unleashes his signature, bone-crushing pinch grip, driving immense, agonizing pressure directly into the boy's shoulder. The sudden, overwhelming force of the assault wrenches Mori's attention backward in a stunned jolt. Brandishing his clenched, hardened fist, Miyamoto flashes a predatory smirk. He leans into his intimidation tactic, mocking his victim's detached demeanor by asking if the vicious squeeze was enough to finally wake him from his sleepy daze. A sharp gasp escapes Mori. Beads of cold sweat instantly form on his pale skin as his eyes blow wide, his teeth grinding together against the sudden, piercing flare of physical pain. But the intimidation tactic fails instantly. Mori's eyes darken with an icy, hollow intensity as he reaches up and effortlessly crushes his own grip around his attacker's wrist, peeling the fingers back. Without a single trace of fear, he coldly voices his sheer annoyance at the violent interruption. Panic erupts at the front of the room. Homeroom teacher Ishida throws his hands onto the wooden podium, his voice cracking in terror as he desperately demands to know what the two boys are doing. The sudden, ironclad resistance catches the towering bully completely off guard. Miyamoto jolts backward, a flash of genuine shock breaking through his aggressive facade as Mori's hand remains firmly locked onto him, neutralizing his monstrous grip. The heavy tension fizzles into absolute absurdity. Having dealt with the threat, Mori simply sits back down and collapses forward, burying his head into his folded arms to sleep. He completely turns his back on the confrontation, entirely dismissing Miyamoto's presence. Left standing awkwardly over the sleeping boy, Miyamoto stares down in utter bewilderment. A single drop of sweat rolls down his face as he openly questions the sheer, incomprehensible nature of the boy sitting before him. Just outside the sterile halls of the faculty office, a heavy tension brews behind the staff room door. Inside the cramped, paper-strewn space, homeroom teacher Ishida rubs his temples in sheer exhaustion. Looming over a younger colleague, Onishi, he complains bitterly about the bizarre new burden that has just been foisted upon his classroom. Onishi blinks, genuinely confused by the older teacher's dread, and asks if the boy is a delinquent. Adjusting his glasses, Ishida quickly shuts the assumption down, warning that the new transfer student, Mori Buntaro, isn't just a bad kid. He is pure trouble. Crossing his arms defensively, Ishida describes a boy entirely locked within his own shell. He paints a grim picture of a student who actively rejects the world around him, existing as a completely unreachable phantom. The grim warning lands heavily on Onishi's shoulders. The older teacher's voice drops to a grave whisper, warning that when a deeply isolated mind finally snaps, there is no telling what kind of devastation they are capable of unleashing. Staring out at the towering exterior of the school building, Onishi quietly stammers his understanding, a deep sense of unease settling over him before his upcoming English class. The piercing shriek of the warning bell echoes through the corridors, sending a trio of frantic female students sprinting down the hall to beat the clock. Their panicked rush suddenly falters. Yumi, a dark-haired girl in the group, skids to a halt, her eyes locking onto a strange sight just off the main corridor. Moving completely in the wrong direction, a solitary figure calmly ascends the stairwell, moving away from the classrooms. It is the enigmatic new transfer student. Her friend desperately cups her hands and shouts up the stairwell, frantically warning the boy that the bell has already rung and pointing him back toward their homeroom. The warning falls on entirely deaf ears. Without a single backward glance or flinch of acknowledgement, Mori breaches the top of the stairs, letting the heavy door click shut behind him, sealing himself away from the student body. The girls are left standing in bewildered silence. Shrugging off the strange encounter, the loud girl grabs Yumi to hurry to class, but Yumi lingers for a fleeting second, her gaze fixed thoughtfully on the empty stairwell where the phantom boy vanished. Inside the sterile walls of classroom 3-1, roll call hits a sudden dead end as the teacher's voice echoes the name of the missing transfer student into the void. A heavy, awkward silence blankets the perfectly aligned rows of seated students. No one moves. No one has an answer. Holding the attendance ledger like a useless prop, Onishi sweeps his gaze across the room, genuine confusion etching his features as he questions the whereabouts of his newest pupil. Miyamoto sits casually at his desk in the back, leaning back with a smug expression, declaring that the guy is not coming back. Yumi and her friend are shown. The friend applies nail polish and casually mentions they just saw him heading up to the roof. A wave of sheer, bone-deep exasperation washes over Onishi. He lowers his head, realizing Ishida's grim morning warning was entirely accurate. The boy has been at the school for barely an hour and is already making his grand escape. Seizing the perfect excuse, Miyamoto puts on a theatrical display, dramatically collapsing over his desk and groaning loudly about a sudden, agonizing stomachache. Without waiting for permission, the towering delinquent throws his massive, muscular arm over the shoulders of his much smaller lackey, Fuku-chan. Ignoring the smaller boy's panicked protests, Miyamoto demands a personal escort out of the classroom under the thin guise of needing the nurse. The terrible acting fools absolutely no one. Watching from the sidelines, two classmates share a sinister, knowing smirk, quietly relishing the fact that Miyamoto is clearly heading to the roof to violently discipline the arrogant new transfer. Yumi watches Miyamoto leave, her eyes narrowing with deep, silent concern as she realizes a brutal confrontation is entirely imminent. Far above the brewing violence, expansive, sunlit clouds drift peacefully over the school, completely detached from the human tension building beneath them. Isolated in the quiet sanctuary of the school's roof, Mori leans against the stark concrete wall. Clasping his hands lazily behind his head, he stares out into the void, deeply exhausted by the mere thought that it is only the first period of the day. Seeking complete oblivion, he abandons his posture entirely and drops flat onto the hard concrete of the sprawling empty rooftop, ready to sleep the entire day away in utter isolation. His eyes droop with a heavy, profound apathy. The absolute exhaustion of simply existing around others weighs down his every feature. But his sanctuary is instantly breached. A sudden, jarring metallic scrape cuts through the wind as a muscular hand violently clamps onto the bottom rail of the perimeter fence, coming from the deadly outside ledge. The piece shatters into absolute horror. Looming upside down from beyond the protective safety railing, Miyamoto's crazed, wide-eyed face violently thrusts through the metal bars, unleashing a deafening, terrifying roar directly at the sleeping boy. Mori's pupil shrinks into a pinprick of pure adrenaline-fueled shock. A panicked yelp rips from Mori's throat as his survival instincts violently kick in. He scrambles backward across the concrete, desperately putting distance between himself and the monstrous face invading the fence. Hanging precariously over the deadly drop, Miyamoto erupts into a cruel, hysterical fit of laughter. He relishes the sheer terror in the transfer student's eyes, ruthlessly mocking Mori for being so paralyzed by fear that he can't even drag himself off the floor. Defying every law of common sense, Miyamoto stands casually on the razor-thin outer ledge of the roof. Decked out in a professional climbing harness, he shouts down to the ground, signaling his lackey to kill the belay line. Mori sits frozen on the concrete, his brain struggling to process the sheer absurdity of the situation unfolding before him. From Mori's vantage point, the reality of the extreme danger sets in. Miyamoto isn't just hanging out a window. He is standing on the absolute precipice of a deadly drop. Gripping the iron bars of the safety fence, Mori stares through the metal, his hollow eyes blowing wide in genuine, unfiltered disbelief. The true, terrifying scale of Miyamoto's stunt is revealed. He hasn't used the stairs. To assert his utter physical dominance, he has violently free-climbed the sheer, vertical exterior of the multi-story school building. Secured only by a single rope anchored by his trembling lackey on the distant ground below. With a sharp clink of metallic hardware, Miyamoto vaults over the safety railing, planting his feet firmly onto the roof. He immediately goes on the offensive, mocking Mori for ditching his class on his very first day. Detaching himself from his lifeline, the towering Miyamoto steps forward, his voice dripping with condescension as he interrogates Mori about his past, asking if his previous school was just too tough for him to handle. A sinister, predatory smirk stretches across Miyamoto's face. He leans in, confidently diagnosing Mori as nothing more than a pathetic chronic shut-in who completely refuses to face reality. Unfazed by the psychological probing, Mori's expression remains dead flat. He coldly and instantly rejects the theory. Mori's dark eyes narrow with sheer irritation as he voices his absolute annoyance at the interruption. Miyamoto only laughs, towering over the seated boy and flipping the script, accusing Mori of faking his gloomy, detached persona purely as a desperate, pathetic cry for attention. Disgusted by the entire interaction, Mori immediately turns his back on the confrontation, deciding the roof is no longer quiet enough for him and walking away. But Miyamoto refuses to let his prey escape so easily. Reaching out, his massive hand clamps down onto Mori's shoulder, forcefully halting his retreat. The physical grab strikes a raw nerve. Shedding his apathetic shell, Mori violently surges backward, his voice cracking with sudden, explosive anger as he demands Miyamoto back off. The fierce reaction catches Miyamoto completely off guard, forcing him to stumble. Rather than anger, a twisted, fascinated grin spreads across Miyamoto's face. He leans in, highly amused by the sudden spark of life, and probes deeper, asking if the transfer student is hiding some deeply complicated, tragic history behind his dead eyes. Mori snaps his gaze backward, his dark eyes burning with a piercing, lethal glare that silently warns Miyamoto to stand down. A dark, scheming smirk curls the corner of Miyamoto's mouth. He has completely figured out how to press the transfer student's buttons. Surprisingly, Miyamoto yields. Throwing his hands up in mock surrender, he takes a physical step back, casually promising to drop the interrogation and leave the gloomy boy alone. The space between them crackles with a new, dangerous energy. Leaning back against the iron railing, Miyamoto shifts his tactics. Instead of violence, he issues a direct, impossible challenge to the isolated boy. Climb. Miyamoto's eyes narrow into razor-sharp, predatory slits. He issues an insane ultimatum, demanding that the apathetic transfer student prove his worth by free climbing the sheer, deadly vertical drop of the school building, from the dirt all the way up to the roof. Mori stares back, his face a mask of utter bewilderment, completely unable to process the sheer lunacy of the demand. Dismissing Miyamoto as entirely unhinged, Mori turns his back for a second time, bluntly declaring that he has absolutely no interest in such suicidal games. But Miyamoto doesn't take no for an answer. With a swift, aggressive motion, he lashes out, driving a firm kick directly into the center of Mori's spine. As Mori staggers from the strike, Miyamoto leans forward, pointing a massive, calloused finger directly at his back. He offers a devil's bargain. Complete the death-defying climb from the ground to the roof, and the harassment stops forever. Mori freezes in his tracks, his back turned to Miyamoto as the heavy weight of the challenge hangs in the cold air. The apathy entirely vanishes from Mori's face. He slowly looks back over his shoulder, his dark eyes sharpening into a lethal, intense glare. The challenge has finally hooked him. Outside, the colossal, multi-story facade of the school building looms against the sky. A sheer, brutal expanse of concrete and glass that stands as a deadly, vertical gauntlet. Meanwhile, safely inside the confines of the school, the English teacher, Onishi, obliviously lectures the class, writing a poetic quote on the chalkboard about a living thing of sheer power and beauty dwelling among them. A chilling prophecy of the monstrous talent about to awaken on the school walls outside. Onishi stands before the class, his English textbook open as he looks up, his brow furrowed as he senses a sudden, inexplicable disruption among the students. Onishi pauses mid-lesson, a sudden, sharp realization washing over his features as he catches sight of something impossible through the window. The classroom erupts into chaotic noise as students scramble to the glass, their faces pressed against the panes, shouting in disbelief at what they see outside. His gaze drifts slowly toward the window, his eyes widening into intense, distressed slits as the reality of the scene outside registers in his mind. Clinging to a vertical metal drainpipe on the concrete exterior of the school, Mori moves with spider-like precision, taut against the vertical drop. Onishi lets out a strangled, visceral shout of pure terror as he watches the boy precariously grip the pipe high above the ground. Onishi turns toward the window, his composure shattering as he lets out a desperate, guttural cry of alarm. Inside the classroom, the tension ripples outward as students bolt from their seats to see what has ignited the teacher's panic. Yumi and those around her press toward the window, their faces frozen in disbelief as they witness the impossible. Ignoring the commotion just inches away, Mori clings to the sheer concrete, his eyes fixed on the climb ahead, leaning precariously over the window ledge. Onishi screams at the boy, suspended on the outer wall, his voice straining against the wind. Down on the ground, the shock continues to spread, drawing the attention of two students who crane their necks to stare at the figure high above. The realization hits Miyamoto as he stands at the base of the building, gazing up alongside his peer, watching the life-threatening ascent in stunned silence. High above the ground, Mori Buntaro clings to the metal pipe on the building's exterior, his calm expression contrasting with the audible strain of the metal groaning under his weight. Word of the dangerous spectacle ripples through the school, drawing dozens of students to the windows to watch the climb in disbelief. Down on the ground, Miyamoto and his companion watch the ascent, their initial bravado shattering into visible dread as they realize the life-threatening turn their challenge has taken. Above them, the metal pipe supporting the climber groans under the unexpected strain, its structural integrity pushed to the limit. Mori, his face slick with sweat and his jaw set in rigid focus, maintains his grip as the pipe continues to protest against his weight. Mori's face contorts in raw, agonizing effort, his teeth gritted tightly as he battles the crushing weight of the climb. The intensity of the struggle is mirrored by those watching from below, their faces reflecting growing unease. His arms tremble violently, the muscles straining to their absolute breaking point as he hangs against the sheer wall. Sweat pours down his face, his gaze narrowing as he realizes his current grip is failing and a radical change is required. From below, Miyamoto gestures upward, urgently shouting for Mori to jam his hand between the pipe and the wall, a final desperate correction to save him from complete muscular collapse.